Welcome back to App Stories. This episode is brought to you by Collide and Fitbod. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We had a good discussion in the Pro Show all about browsers. Well, not exactly about browsers, but about why web apps are as popular as they are today, as well as some of my explorations with security cameras and HomeKit. So check that out. If you're not a subscriber, go to appstories.plus to see what you get. You get early episodes that are extended and ad-free. Federico, though, in this part of the main show, I want to talk to you a little bit about browsers because we're seeing so much competition and innovation in the browser segment that you and I had this idea a long time ago to talk about ways Apple could improve Safari, but I think we've decided to go a little broader than that and talk not just about things like automation and the ways Safari could be better, but also just in general, what a modern browser should be in 2023.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's such a fascinating idea and question to consider, because we've seen, as we've hinted in the pre-show for App Stories Plus subscribers, it's been interesting to see this resurgence in third-party browsers over the past few years. And I think most people listening to App Stories, I would assume they have Apple devices, they have iPhones, Macs, and iPads. They must be familiar with this Arc browser made by this sort of used to be secretive company. It's not so secretive anymore. Made by a company called, the Browser Company. And this Arc browser, which is currently in alpha, beta, invite only, I think, on the Mac, coming out on Windows in fall 2023. This Arc browser has really, I think, captured a lot of interest from the press and from folks on Apple platforms because of some really unique ideas that they have in terms of, so far, like the stated sort of mission of the browser company is not just to make a web browser. It is technically a web browser, but they said they believe in this idea of the internet computer, right? If you go watch one of their promo videos, it's this idea of the internet computer. And essentially the concept being, we use so many different web apps these days. Most of our work happens in applications that are actually web apps. What if instead of just making a browser that opens web pages, we made a browser that allowed you to work and live your life and be entertained and play games and take notes and do all the kinds of things you do on your computer, but on the web. So the idea of an internet computer. Arc being one of the different browsers that we've seen lately. And in this, I think we got to consider for this episode this broader backdrop of the likes of Google and Microsoft and Mozilla and other independent browsers, whether it's Brave or Sigma or Vivaldi, which I've used for a while, sort of each having a different take on the browser, each with a particular feature that I think in aggregate we can maybe extrapolate some of those features and talk about the interesting ones.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's an interesting push and pull going on here between reinventing the browser, which I kind of feel is Arc's mission, and giving the browser a makeover. So it really comes down to, are we looking at the browser as a paradigm shift, like a whole different, reinventing it and reimagining what a browser should be and how it should work versus features that should be added to make the browser more useful? And I'm not sure where I fall in that spectrum. I think I probably fall more towards the end of the spectrum where it needs the browser needs a makeover, not reinvention. But it's an interesting question, and I think a lot of people are coming at this from different angles, which is why it's so fascinating. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Collide. Collide has some big news. If you're an Okta user, they can get your entire fleet to 100% compliance. How? If a device isn't compliant, the user can't log into your cloud apps until they've fixed the problem. It's that simple. Collide patches one of the major holes in zero trust architecture: device compliance. Without Collide, IT struggles to solve basic problems like keeping everyone's OS and browser up to date. Unsecure devices are logging into your company's apps because there's nothing to stop them. Collide is the only device trust solution that enforces compliance as part of authentication and is built to work seamlessly with Okta. The moment Collide's agent detects a problem, it alerts the user to give them the instructions they need to fix it. If they don't fix the problem within a set amount of time, they're blocked. Collide's method means fewer support tickets, less frustration, and more importantly, 100% fleet compliance. Visit collide.com/appstories to learn more and book a demo. Again, that's KOLIDE.com/appstories. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show.
So you've tried the Arc browser, I think. What are your some quick thoughts about it? How do you feel about it?
I bounce off it very, very hard every time I open it. I don't like it. And I don't know what it is. I mean, I do kind of know what it is. First of all, it's got too much animation and it's like got too much personality. I sound like the stick in the mud who doesn't like whimsical design, but I think it's a little over the top. And I also don't like kind of the lack of Chrome. The fact that it's really just a borderless window. Well, not quite borderless, but close to borderless window. And I'm not a huge fan of tabs on the side either, I got to say. So there's a lot of little things that I don't like a lot. Still, there are features of it that I think are great. I mean, there's the ability to do, things like fast profile switching. You can kind of log into different spaces with different credentials. So like if you have multiple Mastodon accounts that you use or something like that, you can stay logged into all those separately. Things like that I think are really super useful and make using the web a lot better. I'm just not completely sold. I think it's the design of Arc more than anything else that kind of turns me off when I first open it.
Interesting. So I think for this episode we're gonna come from two completely different perspectives. I love what the folks at Arc are doing, and in fact, I haven't been using Arc. I've been using Edge as my desktop browser lately. And I think Microsoft is borrowing a lot of ideas from Arc lately, especially in the developer version of Edge. So the Edge browser, you can install multiple versions of it. There's the regular stable version, there's the beta version, there's the Canary version, and there's the dev version. The developer version is the one I have. Seems to be the one that gets the sort of regular updates, but not as aggressive pace of updates as the Canary one, which is basically like a new build overnight every day. The developer version of Edge has some really interesting ideas that I think have obviously been borrowed by Arc. For example, one of them being that they have this new rounded UI that's very cozy and friendly. They have these rounded corners for the background for every web page gets a rounded corner. It's displayed as this rounded area on screen that I don't know. It's kind of nice. It makes it feel like it's contained within this very compact UI Chrome. I think it's a good look. And one of the things that Edge has done over the past few days, really, I noticed this like 3 days ago. So Edge is one of the few browsers to support vertical tabs. So tabs on the left side in a sidebar.
Yeah.
And unlike John, I'm a huge fan of vertical tabs.
Why? I think it just moves the mess from the top to the side.
Well, I feel like there's something about the vertical tabs, and especially how they are done now in Edge, that really works for me, because in Edge, you can now collapse the sidebar. So you just get a bunch of favicons on the left side of the screen. There's a pin and unpin button, and it lets you basically minimize the sidebar so that when you go over that strip of icons, it's sort of the sidebar flies out like on hover. It shows you the full tabs, but otherwise, when you sort of mouse away from it, it collapses and it's just a very thin strip of vertical icons. I know that like it removes the mess from one place to another, but I guess I'm so used to having sidebars in especially on the iPad. Like my brain is like, I don't know. I've always been a fan of vertical tabs. I don't know why. There's something about them that works well with my brain.
See, I don't like sidebars. I always want my sidebars collapsed. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
I like when I'm in Things, for instance, I collapse the sidebar a lot of the times because I just don't want to see it. And I guess, and I always keep my sidebar collapsed in Safari too. So maybe that's one of the differences. I do like the notion of that kind of flying out of the UI on Edge. That sounds really interesting. And I do think that browsers like Safari could do a lot more with tabs. I mean, we've gotten, tab groups, in my experience, are pretty buggy in terms of how they work, at least on the Mac at the moment. And there are a lot of things I'd like to be able to do with tabs that I can't. For instance, you can't select multiple tabs and just send them somewhere, whether it's a new window or into a tab group or whatever. I'd like to be able to have more control and manipulation over the tabs, both from an automation standpoint with
that's
keyboard.
Because you're using Safari. You can select multiple tabs in Edge.
Yeah, see, that's what I mean. I mean, I have used Safari, and the reason I stick with Safari really is because it's so deeply embedded with the OS, and so many different features rely on having Safari. Now, if Apple opens up iOS in particular and iPad OS to third-party browsers so that they're a first-class citizen alongside Safari, then I could see myself moving to something else. Right now, though, I've stuck with Safari partly because it's the incumbent, and it really has. I'd miss the features that I don't get if I use a third-party browser.
Yeah. So immediately, I would say that one of the areas where browsers could, and especially like Safari, where they could use more innovation is in this department of like the display of tabs.
Right.
And I know that Apple tried their hand at this 2 years ago with Safari, but that was a bad job. I think there's something to be said about the way that Arc, especially Arc, but also Edge lately, how they deal with vertical tabs. Something that I really like about both Arc and Edge is the way that you can pin your tabs. And if you have pinned tabs and a vertical display of tabs, those pins, they have their own little section at the top of the sidebar for quick access. And especially in Arc, they really lean into this idea of you're working and you're spending time in your browser, because those tabs, they get things like a badge indicator if you have a Gmail tab and you have unread messages, or you're playing audio in Spotify, or you're watching a video in YouTube, you get media controls at the bottom of the sidebar on the left. Like those things, they really show this idea of you're not just opening a link and then closing a tab before navigating to the next native app on your computer. You're spending time in the browser, because so many of these services that we have these days are web services, are websites, and therefore why not optimize the browser for spending time in it? And so I think this idea of the sidebar, Apple has a sidebar in Safari, and I would like them to try something else for the design and display and management of multiple tabs.
Well, let me ask you a question, Federico. If you had the choice between using something like Notion or Slack or Discord in a browser tab as opposed to the apps that are really just, web wrappers at the end of the day, which would you choose?
It depends. Lately, I have increasingly used a lot of these services in my web browser.
Okay.
Because I don't see... See, the thing is, if there's a better native alternative, I'm going to prefer the native app. And I've always been that way. Like if there's a native app that does everything I need and more than a potential web counterpart, I'm going to prefer the native app. But when the native app is just a a wrapper for the web app, I might as well just pin it in my web browser. And I think this is where like the core of this episode of App Stories lies here, in the difference
Yes,
between
it
you
does.
and me, in how you don't like spending time in the browser, and I instead over the past 6 months or so have accepted the idea of spending time in my browser. I think
Right.
it all comes down to this difference.
It really does. And I think the problem that I've always had with it, and maybe this is more a problem of Safari than it is anything else, is that working in the browser, those tabs get lost and it becomes part of the mess. With better tab control, I think you have a better argument for actually working in the browser, which is what I was getting at and asking you, because I know you've been using Edge, and Edge does do a better job with tab manipulation. It probably has some areas where it could be better, but maybe I should be trying Edge right now.
One of the things, and these are features that Chrome has too, by the way, again, because Edge
Sure.
is based on Chromium. I just prefer I think Microsoft does a better job at designing
I
a
do
Chromium
too.
browser than Google does. And
Yeah,
I think,
do too.
broadly speaking, this is my argument. Microsoft is better at design than Google. That's my thesis. It's not as good at design as Apple, though. I will also say that. But one of the many things I like about tab management in Edge, you can mute tabs if they're playing audio. Just right click and say mute. You can right click a tab and say send to my devices, and it's gonna send that tab to Edge on your phone or tablet. You can duplicate a tab, which sounds ridiculous, but it's so useful sometimes to just I want to change. I want to do something slightly different on this web page. Let me duplicate this tab. Like I've used that, and one of the features that I think Arc pioneered, and once again Edge sort of copied. I think Google is working on this too. Maybe, I'm not positive. Split screen.
Right.
Split screen view for tabs. I love split screen. I love the way Arc does it. Split screen has been really handy for me. I'm going to give you an example. Every Friday when we work on Mac Stories Weekly, we upload everything to our GitHub repo.
Right.
Lately, I have a bookmark for the Clap Mac Stories repo in Edge. I click the bookmark, and it takes me to the root view of the repo, which has a list of markdown documents. In Edge, I can stay on the left side. I'm going to stay in the main view of the repo. I'm going to right-click on each document and say open in split screen. And it opens the document in split screen. When I'm done, I don't need to close the split screen view. I can just click on the next document and say replace split screen. And it's going to open that document on the right side instead. Arc, I think, pioneered this idea of, well, what if, why would you want to create multiple windows when you would just want to look at two web pages at the same time? And look, you can totally replicate this idea of a split screen UI with multiple browser windows. But sometimes, we have computers big enough to display two web pages at the same time. So why not? And I really hope that Apple is paying attention to what other browser makers are doing here, because I honestly find the split screen UI for the browser, instead of creating a separate instance of the browser, like a separate window of the browser, I find it very useful.
Oh, I do too. I mean, I think the place where I first started using split screen the most is with Obsidian, which is very much a web-based app with web technologies, because there are so many times when, and it comes down to a lot of the templates and other things that we use for some of the things we create. When I'm getting ready to sit down and create the show notes or the posts for App Stories, I have one document which has a bunch of information in it about the episode. And then I have the actual posts that I'm writing, and I just put them side by side in Obsidian in split screen and work on it that way, copying and pasting things between the documents. And I think there's a good use case for it on the browser as well, because having two windows and having to manage those two windows is inherently more messy and more fiddly than just having one window that's split down the middle. It's just a lot easier, because it's the same thing with Obsidian. I could open two separate Obsidian windows and do the same thing I do with the App Stories show notes that way, but it's simpler when I can split the screen And then when I'm done with the split screen, I can just close the split and go back to a larger view for whatever I'm working on. So I do like that an awful lot myself.
Arc does a better job at this than Edge. Edge doesn't have a keyboard shortcut for managing split screen mode, and it only lets you open split screen.
Yeah, you really need keyboard shortcuts for this kind of stuff.
If there is one, it's not advertised in the UI, which is a problem in and of itself. But the worst problem of Edge's sort of design of split screen mode is that you can only open a split screen mode by right-clicking a link in the current web page.
Oh, yeah.
You cannot, for example, the way that I was thinking, I think the way the Arc lets you do it, for example, is you should be able to select 2 tabs and say, these 2 tabs split the screen, right? You select them and split the screen with these 2. You cannot do this in Edge. I'm really surprised. I really hope that the next version gets it.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Fitbod. Getting fitter is one of those things that often has knock-on effects in other areas of your life that you may not expect, like having more energy and sleeping better. But it can be hard to know where to start. That's why I'm pleased to let you know about Fitbod, an easy and affordable way to build a fitness plan that's just for you. Fitbod's algorithm learns about you, your goals, and your training ability, and will create custom, dynamic programs based on your experience level and the equipment you have. This is all in an app that makes it incredibly easy to learn how to perform each exercise. Personal fitness is not about competing with other people. You don't want to look to others to know what to do. What you need is something that will work for you. That's when things really stick and when you'll see the results that you're looking for. Everyone's path to fitness is different, which is why Fitbod uses data to make sure they customize things exactly to suit you. Fitbod's powerful technology understands your strength training ability, studies your past workouts, and adapts to your available gym equipment. And your training plan will maximize fitness gains by intelligently varying the intensity and volume between sessions. Working out some muscles while underworking others can negatively impact results. That's why Fitbod tracks muscle fatigue and recovery to design a well-balanced workout routine. The Fitbod app is so simple to use with over 1,400 high-definition video tutorials shot from multiple angles to make sure that learning each exercise is a breeze. And it also integrates with the Apple Watch, Wear OS smartwatches, and apps like Strava, Fitbit, and Apple Health. I've always been a runner, and one of the things about runners is that when they want to go out and work out, they just want to run more. And the problem with that is that doing that only exercises certain muscles. It only makes you a good runner. But if you're looking to become more fit overall and to strengthen more than just your legs and your cardiovascular system, Fitbod is perfect. You may be an expert in one area of fitness, like I am with running, but you might not know as much about strength training, for instance, which is why I started using Fitbod. It's a great app for getting into strength training, especially using the equipment that you already have. I have some things around the house. I've got some weights and that sort of thing, but I don't have a full-on gym. But that doesn't matter because Fitbod can adapt its program specifically to what I do have. And if I buy some more fitness equipment in the future, I could add that to Fitbod and it will adjust my program accordingly. Personalized training of this quality can be expensive, but Fitbod is just $12.99 per month or $79.99 a year. But you can get 25% off your membership by signing up at fitbod.me/appstories. So go there and get your customized fitness plan today, right away at fitbod.me/appstories. And you'll get 25% off your membership. That's fitbod.me/appstories for 25% off. Our thanks to Fitbod for their support of the show. Federico, you just mentioned keyboard shortcuts, and I agree with you. Keyboard shortcuts are incredibly important in browsers. And I think, especially with the current generation of various web apps, it's important for them to be displayed in the UI because this is something that I find to be a bit of a paper cut with working with web apps, is that many of them follow kind of a different philosophy than your traditional, for instance, Mac app shortcuts, right? They maybe use something that's closer to what Gmail has always done, or
those shortcuts I can never memorize. Yeah.
right. And so they're different, and there's difference not necessarily worse, but it's very hard. It's bad enough keeping keyboard shortcuts in your mind that follow some sort of Mac OS convention. But the problem is multiplied when you start using web apps and they're not using modifiers. They maybe are just using letters, for instance, and they use letters that may mean something very specific in a Mac OS context, but don't mean that in the web app. And so that I think in and of itself is a problem, but there is a solution, which we see in Arc and in Sigma and a bunch of other browsers, which is the action bar, which is the Command K menu, where there's some sort of keyboard trigger, whether it's Command K or the space bar or whatever it happens to be, that's a lot like historical launcher apps, where you can start typing into a box that appears and find the commands that you want. And if it's done well, with some kind of fuzzy logic for searching for the commands you want, you don't have to know those keyboard shortcuts. Although the version that I like the best is where those action bars show you what the keyboard shortcut is, as well as the command, so that if you want to and you do it enough, you can commit it to memory, and then you can use the keyboard shortcut if you don't want to use the action bar.
I love this idea of
Yep.
I actually wrote about Command K bars previously on Mac Stories. I think this idea of having sort of like a chat box, but for discovering keyboard shortcuts and commands is excellent, especially on an iPad, where you don't have a traditional menu bar and where you can discover keyboard shortcuts, but really it's kind of unintuitive because it takes over whatever you're doing at the moment. And just this idea of you just hit a keyboard shortcut and you can trigger a command or you can search for it and you learn as you go, like finding and learning are related with this kind of interaction. I think it's really well done. Once again, in terms of web browsers, Arc leading the way with it. I think it's Command T, right? It's the classic keyboard shortcut for creating a new tab, I think. Edge, once again, Edge has one. It's Command Q or Control Q on Windows.
Really?
I don't know why it's I don't know why it's Q, but I don't know why. But it doesn't. It's just like this floating search box that lets you find basic commands, but doesn't really have the same polish or breadth of the Arc one. So
Q for I was going to say Q for query, I guess, or question.
Query or question, yeah.
But I usually think quit. I think quit when I
quit. Yeah. So So the keyboard shortcut integration, I think it really makes sense as a feature to have. There's something else I want to cover, John, which is in terms of imagining the browsers. And I think there's actually a lot of movement on this front lately. Highlights, web highlights. So I have been looking into building a shortcut that I cannot build yet for Apple users because Safari doesn't support this relatively new web API. I don't know if you noticed, but Google Chrome, Edge, maybe Vivaldi too, they now let you highlight something, anything on a web page, and they are going to show you in the context menu, copy link to highlight as an option. And sure enough, that gives you a link that when you paste it and send it to somebody else, or when you reopen it later, it's going to highlight the passage of text that you selected and highlight it in yellow or something, and scroll the web page directly to that point. And so the first time I saw this, when I was playing around with Google Chrome and Edge, I was like, wait, how is this possible? Because normally I'm used to having highlights in dedicated services like Readwise or Matter or, extensions, that I've installed in my browser, but they're not normally like a native browser feature.
And even those can't link to those highlights, right? All they're doing is highlighting it on the page and then copying
Exactly.
the text.
It's not just highlighting, but linking to those highlights, which is an incredible idea. It's like something I wanted forever. So it turns out this is a new web API called Web Fragments. It's a new web CSS thing that hasn't been adopted by Safari yet. Really hope that Apple gets around to adopting this for Safari 17 this year. Chrome has it, Edge has it, and it's wonderful. They basically, when you select something and you select the copy link to highlight option, you're gonna get a regular URL of the current web page. At the end of the URL, there's gonna be sort of like this tilde character that's gonna say text and an encoded version of the text you highlighted on the page, and that link can return to that spot on the web page and highlight that spot. I really, really hope that Safari gets support for web fragments. This idea is excellent. Apple sort of kind of got halfway there with its Quick Note integration on iPadOS and sort of on iPhone with 16. But I don't want to... I want to be able to have... This is my dream, John, for the web browser. I want my browser to have sort of a working memory of all the things I highlight over the course of my life in the browser, right? Neither Chrome or Edge do this at the moment. They just let you highlight and create these one-off links. Broadly speaking, I would love, and I think Apple can do a good job at figuring this out, if they ever maybe think about redoing reading list. This would be a perfect reading list makeover. In general, I want to be able to create bookmarks for things I highlight in my browser. And I think Apple can do a good job here if they adopt the Web Fragments API.
That's really interesting. And I think it's great. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing I want too. I want something more than just returning to a web page and seeing some yellow highlighted text too. I would like that. That's a good feature, but I would also like the ability to, even if it's not in the browser, hook these fragments into another app and be, like kind of Devon Thinks style, I suppose, or Keep It style, right? And be able to organize them in my own way and tag them and make them organized in my own way, and then be able to go from that app and jump right back into the web browser when I wanted to see the context in which I highlighted that. It would be fantastic. I do wonder, Federico, what happens if you highlight a fragment and then that fragment changes on the source material?
It stops working. I tried that.
Because it sounds like it's really working on kind of a text search basis if it's encoding the entire string of text.
Yeah, it's looking for a specific HTML, CSS anchor somewhere in the web page, and it uses that as sort of the reference point. So if that changes...
Yeah, it's a local anchor that you create, I suppose, right?
Yeah, but it's really excellent. And you can try it now in Google Chrome and Edge, even on iOS. You can just select something and copy a link to the highlight, and it's going to work. And I wanted to build a shortcut to take advantage of this. And here's the thing. Some fragment-based URLs, they already work in Safari on Apple platforms. This is why I'm hopeful that we're going to see proper and official support for this in Safari 17, because I can tell you that some links that I created with my shortcut, they work in Safari for iOS, iPadOS, and macOS at the moment. They scroll and they highlight the passage of text in yellow. The problem is, I think this support is unfinished from Apple's part at this point, because I think I can always break it if there's any special character in the selected text. Things like curly quotes and apostrophes and things like that.
Sure. Anything that's not like straight up.
Just a letter or a number.
A letter or a number. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
That's pretty cool.
Those are highlights. I think we have some other things, some other features that we would like to mention. One that is dear to me, and we are seeing innovation on this front, even from Apple. So I guess I'm wishing for this to continue in the future. This idea of going beyond favorites. with things like tab groups. Edge has collections. I believe Google Chrome has collections too. Just this idea of, yeah, we have tabs and yeah, we have favorites, but what if the browser could also help you research and categorize web pages for later in a way that is more useful than just a plain list of bookmarks?
Yeah, I think that that's right. I mean, I think favorites are fine, but I don't think they scale to large collections very well, despite the fact that you can use folders and that sort of thing. So I think that that would be good. Another thing that I really would like to see is more emphasis on saving and preserving web pages. I mean, I think Apple does a pretty good job of this already.
Yes, I think Apple is leading the way here.
Yes, actually. They're doing better than really anybody. But the reality is, I mean, there are times when you want to save a page as it exists on a particular day and date because you know it's going to go away. And so whether that's a web archive file or a PDF, those things I know with modern technologies built into web pages aren't that easy to preserve, but Apple's done a pretty good job at it in Safari. And I'd like to see it take it even further to, adapt to the latest technologies, but also see other browser vendors do the same thing. Because I know just from a research standpoint and an archival standpoint, I like to have some of those things preserved and saved the way they were on a particular day.
What are your thoughts on what Arc is doing in terms of native features built into the browser to clip portions of web pages, take notes, capture like live screenshots? I believe they call that like the easel.
The easel, yeah.
How do you feel about that?
It's fine. I mean, I don't know. It reminds me of the macOS dashboard.
Oh, you really don't like spending time in the browser, do you?
No, I don't. It reminds me of macOS's dashboard a little bit, where you could do web clips that were live in the past, and you could put your favorite comic on there or something that would change every day or whatever it happens to be, or the weather or something. I don't know. It's just not something that I think I would use much. I mean, I'm not like a visual clipper of stuff on the web, and that I think it would work really well for things like mood boards or design ideas or, fonts you like or things like that. But I don't really do much of that sort of thing. So it's not really for me.
Something that you like, though, and maybe we can close out the episode with this one, automation and integration with shortcuts. And this is specific to Apple platforms.
Very much so.
I think I personally feel like there's so much more that could be done with browsers. Apple has done a decent job, especially on iOS and iPadOS, not so much on macOS.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of using shortcuts to automate a web browser.
I agree. I think that there are areas where Apple's done a very good job, particularly being able to pull out various aspects of a web page, whether it's the title or the author or the content and the publication date, those sorts of things. But I would like to manipulate the browser more. I'd like to be able to do things like do all the things that we've talked about with tabs, but do them in shortcuts, for instance. I'd also like to be able to get links out in batches in various formats, not just as, a URL or maybe a rich link or HTML or Markdown or whatever it might be. And I don't know. I mean, there's just a lot here. Reader mode, I think, has virtually no. It doesn't have. I don't think you can get into reader mode with a shortcut. And the read later list, all you can do is open it. Really, you can't do much more than that. So there's a lot that could be done there. I think tabs kind of goes hand in hand with tab groups. That it would be nice to be able to create a shortcut where you're on a page and you can just send that tab into one of your tab groups right there, or duplicate it into the tab group. There's all kinds of different ways you could use automation once you break it down on the level of both tab groups and the tabs that are in those tab groups.
Yeah. So, broadly speaking, I think it's going to be fun to revisit this episode later this year, especially if, due to external forces, Apple will have to allow third-party browsers on iPhone and iPad. And, we've heard We've seen that Google is preparing for the potential of having a real version of Chrome built with Chromium, run on iPhone and iPad. Mozilla is also preparing with Firefox and its Gecko engine. Everybody's getting ready, and usually where there's smoke, there's fire with these things. If I were, something that I think I've learned over time is that a lot of these folks working on browser engines, it's a very tight-knit community, and if this works, if these folks are investing resources in these things, my theory is that they have heard something.
Yeah, and they're not doing it for no reason at all.
Exactly. So that's why I wanted to do this episode this year, because I think we may be due for some major changes in just 3 months, John. Just 3 months to go.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's interesting times in the world of browsers.
Maybe you're gonna love the browser again.
All right, Federico, good conversation. I want to thank our two sponsors for this episode again. That's Collide and Fitbod. You can find both of us on Mastodon, and we have special pages set up to follow us. You can go to vitici.macstories.net or johnvorhees.macstories.net. There you will find our profile pages with a follow button where you can follow us. We're also on Instagram, where Federico is at Vitici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.